Thanks for tuning in to the World XP podcast. If you're enjoying the content, please drop us up, drop a like, and let us know your thoughts below in the comments. Also, please consider supporting our podcast via the link below. It really helps us out. Shannon, welcome to the World XP podcast. How are you today?
Great, thanks. How are you?
Can't complain. It's the weekend. It's almost Christmas. All good things. For the people listening, why don't you do a quick intro for yourself so they kind of know who you are and what you do. I know we've got maybe a little bit short on time, but that's all right. We'll get through all the fun things, and then we'll hop into the question from the last guest. As always, for those listening, you'll know. And then, yeah, we'll see where it takes us.
Great. My name is Shannon Rugani. I also have a pop music stage name, Empress, and I use both. I was a ballerina for 15 years with San Francisco Ballet, 11 years professional and a couple years in the school. And I transitioned onto Broadway, where I did the lead role in a Broadway musical called An American in Paris. I started off in the ensemble, just saying, but I did the lead eventually. And then let's see, now I am a singer-songwriter under the stage name Empress for my pop music. And then I also do classical compositions under my name, Shannon Rugani. And
Very
that is,
nice.
in a nutshell, I'm
That's a
an
lot
artist.
of things. That's a lot. That's a lot of things for sure. All things in the musical kind of performance industry. So I'm actually very interested in uh, this your answer to this question, which is what is your greatest fear and why? And the person that asked that happens to work in the mental health kind of space.
Wow.
So yeah, we'll start off diving right in. Um,
Okay, well, yeah, that's a great question because I just went through the most terrifying experience, which was having a baby. And I will tell you, I was so nervous about like the inevitable, like how do you get a watermelon out of your body kind of thing that most women think about like after you get pregnant. You're like, hang on, this is gonna suck. And I know pain. I've been injured a million times, but the pregnancy was terrible for me. I was sick the entire time. So like I just faced that fear right away. And then the labor, I had this thing called prodromal labor, which is fake labor. So you're going through all the labor pains, but the baby isn't coming. It's like just puff puff, not coming, mom. And it was terrible. It was 6 days of labor, and I almost died, and so did the baby. And it was just like the worst thing. And in all of that, that was my worst fear. And I was like living it, like the whole thing. When I thought for the split second that I was like, oh my God, I could die. The first thought, very first thought was like, I want more time with the family. I want to live my life. The second tier was I um my fear is that I don't have enough time to create all the things that I want to create, all the music, all of the writing, all of the creative endeavors that I have my fingers in all of the cookie jars. So that was my biggest fear, was that I wouldn't have enough time in this life to do all the things that I know I'm supposed to do. That's a long-winded answer, but mostly I was nervous about the pregnancy, but all of the terrible things happened and I lived through it, and that was amazing. But in the shadows, I was nervous about not having enough time.
but you're healthy and the baby's healthy as well, so
Fine. Yeah, we
all good
lived,
things.
we survived. I've done a lot of healing, a lot of therapy. And we're on the other side, and she's strong and healthy and I'm fine.
So did the symphony that you just finished, was that a way to like get your brain off of the rest of that and just dive into like so kind of skipping around for those listening normally if you've been around enough we go kind of chronological but I'm foregoing that this time because I'm interested in different things. So was that a way for you to just like get your brain off of that? And how did you I guess firstly, where did you start? Like, did somebody ask you to do it, or were you just like, oh, I want to do a symphony?
Yeah, no, I've always wanted to write a symphony, like a full symphony. But last year I was commissioned for my first symphony. And it was a short piece. It was a 25-minute piece. for a ballet. And so it's very fitting, is in my wheelhouse, if you will. And so I did that piece, and the choreographer slash director of the ballet, when we were there for the premiere, she was like, we have a bigger project that I would like to collaborate with you. And, if you're interested, she goes, I know you're having a baby. By the way, it's a woman who has two kids, so she's the most understanding. She commissioned me to do this bigger piece, which is a ballet for Marilyn. It's about Marilyn Monroe. It'll be commissioned by three and performed by four companies next year. And so I was commissioned while I was pregnant. And so I had all this time to kind of like learn about Marilyn Monroe and kind of go down that little it's not a little rabbit hole, but go down the rabbit hole and kind of get the essence of her. But it was the I hadn't started until after I had the baby. And yeah, it was a really great way for me to kind of heal and take my mind off of what I had just experienced, and also put what I experienced into the music, which is very emotional, and it's beautiful. And I every time I play it for someone new, they usually cry. And I think that is pretty cool that I could bake the emotions that I was going through into a project. And it's creatively, yeah, very, very fulfilling to be able to do something like that.
Yeah. Where do you start with, and this is my own kind of playwriting kind of ignorance, but was this one that's been around for a while or is this a brand new thing?
Brand new,
So
brand
where
new.
so where do you start musically for something like that? Because with the ones that have been around for a while, like Oklahoma or The Lion King
I
on Broadway, all these things, like you've kind of got an idea of what the music is or what it's supposed to sound like. So if you're starting from scratch, like where do you even begin? Because you've got, and we spoke about this on the phone, where as a performer, you got your part, but as a composer, you've got all the parts and they all have to fit together and you have to decide
Thanks
keys and
for
tempos
acknowledging.
and yeah,
Yeah,
keys and
totally.
tempos and all sorts of different things and timings and swells and if accents and all these sorts of things and they have to fit perfect. So like where do you even start?
I know it's so complex because and it is very cool to be now on the other side. So as an actress or a dancer, you're basically like given your little piece of choreography within the whole, but it's there's no control over anything. Whereas this, I have so much more creative control, and I'm the first one like basically doing anything on a project because they need the music in order to make the ballet. So I have to think about a lot more than just the music. Like, okay, well, do you have enough time for, and as a dancer, I'm asking these questions like, do you have enough time for this person to do a costume change? Like, how much music, how much realistically, how much time do we need? 30 seconds? Okay, well, now I have to create something extra for 30 seconds, which is kind of hard to do with music. You're like, it's usually an eight counts or something. But for
Hmm.
this, I'm like, okay, 30 to 35 seconds of music here. But I started with a concept, like a pitch deck essentially from the choreographer. And she I forget what they call it. There's like a name for this thing that they do, and it's basically they draw out everything about the storyline. Like they just lay it all out, and so the storyline was kind of already there. And then I went into the weeds and I learned about Marilyn because what I really wanted to do was get the essence of her as much as I could. It's kind of like a well-known person in the history, so there's a lot of expectation already, from like that era. You have to respect the music in that era, but you don't want to copy it, right? So like there is a lot of pressure for me. Like maybe I was just putting the pressure on myself. So what I did first was I watched every movie, all the documentaries, read as many books as I could get my hands on, and then I went into sub characters like all of her ex-husbands, and then I went into JFK and I did all the thing, there's a lot of like side characters that I also
Hmm.
learned about, just so I could get the essence. And I feel like that alone helped me write the music because when I sat down and I was like, what would it feel like to, be abused by Joe DiMaggio or something? And then I could really go into it because I felt like I heard almost like her inner feelings in music form. I know it sounds super weird and vague, but it was really easy once I sat down to like write the music. If I knew the storyline kind of inside and outside, and then I put myself into her shoes, the music just kind of flowed. And then I started at the end so that I kind of like knew what vibe I was going with. And then I went to the beginning and started kind of from there and just pieced it all together. Took me 6 months and it was freaking hard with a newborn baby. It was like the hardest thing I've ever done. I thought it was hard when I was just like had morning sickness and just felt terrible. But this was like creating the biggest project I've ever created on scrap time around a baby schedule, which is like nuts. It'd be like
Yeah.
3 I'm wide awake with music in my head and I just have to work then because otherwise you're not gonna get any time by yourself. It was hard.
Yeah, no, for sure. I'm everything you said makes complete sense, and the thing that you said about it being vague, it's not vague. It's like, well, to me, anyways, it's not vague. But the part that's super interesting to me is how you actually translate that into um, like notes that then fit together and flow together, and you've got I assume you have a full like symphony from strings and brass and woodwinds and percussion and everything. So like
Uh-huh.
how do you then decide, for example, like you and
What
I
to
could have a conversation about, okay, this scene it makes me feel sad for example. But then
yeah.
you've got all these choices of different like keys and instruments that could then make that sound like we could go down a list of every single instrument and if you play a
Ah,
certain tune in a certain key like for that one it'll work and for this other one it'll work but then it'll only work if you've got the brass behind it. Like how
yeah.
do like where do you decide within that part? Is it like a lot of trial and error? Do you have software
Oh,
where you're like playing
yes.
playing
Mm-hmm.
stuff like so how does that all begin to fit together? So
Yeah.
like when you're at the end and you
It's a
said you
great
started
question.
at the end.
Yeah, I start at the
Yeah.
end. And I sit down at the piano first before I do anything and I just doodle until I find either a melody that I really like or a pattern that I can sort of maybe play with and then find a melody, a top line melody. And the first thing that I found was really exciting. My daughter is really musical. I mean, obviously, like we created a symphony together, she's in my belly, but she's still there. And
Hmm.
she's very emotional with the music. So like I think it's really cool to watch babies listen to music because they have no ego attached to their emotions, right? So there's not like this, like, I'm gonna cry or it's just this natural, they just react and it's beautiful. So I was playing this one little kind of chord progression and she would just make this sad face and start crying. And I was like, that's perfect. Like, that's the emotion that I want the audience to feel at the end. Just like kind of sad for her, for this amazing woman who was just ahead of her time. I also wanted it to be empowering. And so I was like, violin is going to be her voice throughout the entire piece. So it just turned into this beautiful violin. As like whenever it's the scenes about her and it's like almost like her expressing something, it's usually going to be a violin because that's just like what it is. Um, and it's just easier to, I don't know, violins are so great because they cut through so much noise. So it's like hard sometimes if you're with like using a horn, you're like, oh God, now I have to sort of quiet everything around them and give like rhythm because there's not a lot of rhythm to the horns, usually. So
Yeah.
it's you have to kind of like make sure there's like a picture frame and you have to make sure it's all proportional. You can't have like too much on one side of the page. You know what I mean? You have
Hmm.
to make sure
100%.
that the center focus is going to be whatever voice you want to be heard in that moment. And so her voice is the violin and the chord progression is kind of referenced throughout the ballet. You know, you kind of will get the idea where you're like, you know what's happening in the story based on like little melodies that I tuck in to places or rhythms or something. People will subconsciously watch it and know what's happening. Um, for instance, the beginning, her childhood was so all over the place where she was put in a bunch of foster homes. I think it was like 13 foster homes and an orphanage, and she was just moved around a lot. But her mother starts off kind of a little, she's normal, but she goes crazy, eventually ends up her in history. She ends up in a insane asylum. And so she kind of had this trajectory of going crazy. And Marilyn, we don't know what would have happened because she obviously died when she was in her 30s, but she was on the same sort of parallel path. And I think she knew that she had the tendency to potentially go mad or whatever they wanted to call it at the time. So the beginning melody is her mom, and at the very end, it's the same melody. It's just I changed the whole bass layer. So in the beginning, it sounds really dark, whereas at the end, it's more sad. And but it's the same top line melody, you know, and the arc of the story is like she kind of almost became her mom, but decided to not go in that same path, obviously, because um, who knows how she died, but we can suspect, you know, there was some suicide attempts in her life. And so it's there's a little bit of grief there as well, like for, you know,
Yeah.
the emotions that I put in there anyways.
Yeah. No, that makes complete sense. 100%. And what's actually super interesting is a YouTube short. I think it was a short, maybe it was a reel. I don't know. One of those things where you're scrolling and you forget what you're doing.
Yeah, you never
Um,
forget. Yeah,
of
my friend got
John,
them.
yeah, of John Williams fiddling with Duel of the Fates, which is one of the famous Star Wars pieces, where he's like, okay, we're gonna do this section. Then he's like, okay, chorus come in now. He's like, no, no, chorus come in next measure or whatever.
Oh,
And I saw that like probably a day before we spoke on the phone, which was strange in itself, coincidental maybe, but
it's not
whatever word you want to use.
coincidences. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, and so have you had a chance to like go with a live orchestra?
Yeah.
How was that for the first time? And how much twiddling did you do or tweaking did you do when it was live?
So almost none. Symphony orchestras are quite the beast. So they show up with their sheet music kind of already set up in front of them, and then they just sight read pretty much. Like they've had the music at home, I would assume, but for the most part, they just show up and they sight read. So last year, I don't know if you've ever heard of this because I hadn't until I was pregnant, but I had severe pregnant brain. Like there is this thing that your brain apparently is on overdrive, but your verbal and your like well, this is very obvious. My verbal skills have gone way down because with a baby, they don't speak. So you're like able to communicate with them on a different level. So
Ah.
your brain's on overdrive, but words and details kind of go missing, you know? So
Yeah.
they say your EQ goes way up, it's like skyrockets, and your IQ drops. And they've proven this. It comes back apparently, which I'm still waiting for that, but you know. But apparently that's what happens. It's like they call it pregnant brain. There's this other thing after you have the baby called milk brain because your brain is just like I don't know, fried like an egg, essentially. So details are really important with a symphony orchestra. This is the whole point of my story, is that the symphony sight reads. So if it's incorrect on the page, they're just going to play it incorrectly. So that if they mess up, it's like on you. So I ended up having to hire a really, really amazing oh gosh, what is the title of see words? Milk Brain.
Conductor, composer.
No, not composer, and not conductor. They do the orchestration. So he was an orchestrator, and I hired him to just like make sure all the T's were crossed and the I's were, you know, like perfect. And so when we played it, when they played the symphony live, there's not a lot of time. It's really expensive to rehearse an entire symphony. So they basically give you for ballet, they have uh, the orchestra rehearsal, then they go with the dancers, they do dress rehearsal, and then it's the show. So it's three rehearsals total. So like you better have your shit in order before you get to the theater, essentially. So there's no like can you play this differently? It's like, well, it's not on the page. So unless you want to rewrite it or
Rewrite
something.
it. Oh
It's
wow,
so
that's crazy.
like, yeah, it's pretty it's like it's on you if it's not good,
Okay,
essentially.
so the first time you hear it live, full symphony, what's going through your brain? Like, are you
I
nervous
cried.
when
I
you're
mean,
getting
I
there?
was highly emotional because I was pregnant anyways. But I cried. It was incredible
So like
just to
you walk in, you see them all set up. They haven't started yet. What's going through your head?
I mean, I was so excited to hear my music played. I've always wanted it, and I'm so grateful. My entire career, I've had live orchestras. I've just danced to live music. My like for 20 years, I danced with an incredible orchestra in San Francisco Ballet and then also on Broadway. Always live orchestra, always beautiful music. Maybe not always, but like it was always live and it was always really well done, even if I didn't like the music. It's art is subjective, right?
Yeah.
Um, and so I got to dance with incredible ex I mean my experience was amazing that way. So it's not like I've not been around orchestras, but to hear your own music is so incredible and to have heard it in my head for so long, to hear it in real life, it just feels like quite quite a manifestation, like a real, you're like, wow, I'm living my dream right now. This is incredible. And what was really special about that one too, that one was also a really, really sad storyline in general. So the music was really emotional and there were people in the audience that were sobbing. And like for opening night, there was this guy behind us, and I literally turned around. I was like, "Are you okay?" So I wasn't sure. I was like, "He's like maybe choking. I'm not sure," but he was just sobbing. It was amazing, really beautiful experience. And obviously the audience felt the same, which is really cool.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Wow. On the sight reading point, I want to highlight for my own, well, for my own self, but there's this I don't know if you've heard of Drumeo before.
Mm.
So they've got this series where they like bring in these drummers or whatever, and then they play them music that they've never heard before, and they're like, just go.
Just go.
Yeah. So some of them like take a listen through and they kind of like write out the like the breakdown or like this is where
Yeah.
the bridge is or whatever. There's one guy, Chad Smith, who's the Red Hot Chili Peppers drummer, takes
Mhm.
takes his on the first try, and there's a supercut of all these people on YouTube like reacting to it. And when he just starts to play, they're all of their jaws are just on the floor. And a lot of these people are drummers as well, so like they're good enough in their own right to like understand what's going on. And all of the YouTube comments were like, "No, it's fake. There's no way this is possible." And like when I watched him do it, like the level of which these musicians, like how good they are, is like is amazing. Like for these professional people in the symphonies, they just show up and sight read a complex like symphony or whatever, and like
Yeah.
people at that
Or you're
level
like,
just
I'm gonna make this tricky for these people, and they're just like, let me just put down my coffee and my magazine still open just in case I want to read it while I'm,
yeah.
just like it's incredible.
Yeah, it's so good. Like the musical, like the just I don't know, it leaves me
So
speechless
I know
every
it's really
time almost.
cool about that particular like career path and that art form is different than the athletic side that I was on, right? Or the even like in acting, there's various roles, but your career span is a lot shorter just because it's based on like your look, essentially.
Hmm.
So the visual art forms that I was a part of, your career is a lot shorter. And so we call the peak of, or well, this is what I think anyways, the peak of your career is when your physicality meets your artistry and they're like at the top, like they meet at this beautiful place. But then your artistry keeps going up and your kind of like your body declines or
Hmm.
your looks decline or whatever it is as an actress, right? But with music, it's not like that at all. You get better over time, and the more you do it, the more you, I mean, it's just the better you get. So it's pretty cool as a career that you can continue on. And the audition process is really gnarly. And like in order to get a job in the symphony orchestra, it's like a big deal. Free and a job to even pop up is kind of a big deal because you have to have had someone retire because they don't like leave the job, you know? So that to me is like if you can get into a symphony orchestra and like make a living doing that, that's like you don't have to retire and you get better at your job and and then just be able to create all the time. It's amazing.
Yeah, no, for sure. The last piece of the symphony stuff that I wanted to ask, and this is also shameless plug because my friend Peter Barber, who's he's an opera singer, and also kind of does a cappella stuff and YouTube covers and whatever and other things. He's part of a group called the Bass Gang, so there's all four of them are basses.
Nice.
Um, and so I was not really, I had never paid much attention to like bass lines until I spoke to him the first, at this point, a couple of years ago, whatever, whenever the first episode I did with him was. But for you being kind of like singer-songwriter on like kind of the top level melody piece, was it difficult for you to get into the bass and percussive side of things and figure out what was working for what you wanted
Great
as the
question.
melody?
No, not at all. I am a product of a dad who played the drums growing up, so like percussion is like in my blood.
Well,
And
there
I
you
grew
go.
up tapping and doing all that stuff. And when I moved out uh of my like childhood home, my dad just moved in like three drum sets into my bedroom. So whenever I went home to visit in the summer times, I'd be like, all right, screw it, I'll learn how to play the drums. So I learned how to play the drums. I love percussion and I love that. And then the bass is like if you don't have a bass, it just it's a boring world, you know?
So
That's
boring.
like that's the pulse. I think of that as like that's the blood and like the pumping is the heart, right? And that's the bass, that's the drums. So, or percussion in general. And so you need all of that. And I love adding that stuff in. But there's times where if you pull it out, it makes a bigger impact sometimes, like where you think it should get bigger and then you just take it out from under, the melody and then it's just more emotional maybe. I'm just all about the emotion, obviously. I think that that's one of the things that I can really contribute to music is like you will feel things because that's just what I kind of plant and put my little seeds in there, but you will feel it. Like whatever the emotion is that you're supposed to be feeling, it could be excited, but it could also be like you're gonna cry. As a grown man, the man behind me in the opening night, I was like, "You are not okay. What is going on?" And I'm like, "Oh, it's music. Great.
You're like, oh,
Perfect."
it's my fault. I have caused this heart
Yeah.
attack today.
But that's also, I think, something that's cool about women in general with composing. Like we have the ability to kind of use like our strength, which is like being highly emotional, especially like this past year of growing a baby and then having one. You're a different person. If you can find time to compose, because
Yeah,
that's a whole other can
100%.
of worms.
100%. Okay, I have so many questions I want to ask you. I could talk to you all day. Um, I want to backtrack slightly into like the singer-songwriter piece, but also the ballet piece, because a lot of people would not guess that those would mix, and
Yeah.
then let alone to compose as well. So, it sounds like you grew up in kind of a very musical household, so that makes sense. But where
Not,
did the
not musical.
or drum
Percussion is, I feel
percuss?
like it's different, right? Yeah. No, because my mom doesn't play anything. She like family recitals, it'd be like the triangle and she'd fuck it up. She'd be like on the wrong beat. And we'd be like, Mom, no. Um,
Um,
and
okay, so fair enough.
percussion,
Percussive then. Percussive
yeah.
then. So where did the dancing come from? Was that just something that you were always interested in? And then or like
I started.
where did the interests begin and like yeah, yeah. I'll just let
Oh,
you go.
great. No, that's perfect because I'll start when I was 4, my family got a piano and I just started composing. Like that was the because no one I didn't know how to play, obviously. So I
Yeah.
just had a really great ear for music. And so I just like learn things and not learn, but I just play the piano and I loved it. And I taught myself how to play Happy Birthday for my mom's birthday, and she freaked out. She was just like, "Who taught you this? Like, how did you know?" And I was like, I thought I was in trouble. And no one taught me. I'm sorry, you know. She's like, "No, we're just gonna get you lessons. Like, this is nuts." We had really great music lessons in Tahoe. There's this woman who's like the Mary Poppins of music teachers. So I always loved music. So much so that I danced around to music. And my parents were like, what do we do with a little girl? You signed her up for ballet lessons, right? Just not thinking anything of it. But I was really into it, like on a different level. And I grew up in Lake Tahoe, which is there's like there's no ballet really in Lake Tahoe. It's not the first place that you think. When you tell somebody that you're a ballerina, no, if you say you're a dancer in Tahoe, they just assume that you're like performing at the casinos. Like I'm like, no, I'm dancing at the bar, not on the bar. But we definitely
It's an
have like
important distinction.
very, very important and they're spelled differently. But the ballet world in Tahoe is not really like a thing, but I had amazing teachers. Like we had these little fairy godmothers where like, we had a woman who would like teach me on Saturdays for like $5 and she'd spend like 2 hours working with me and it was just like amazing. We had people that really like worked with me and I just loved it. And I got better and better and better until I outgrew Lake Tahoe and I got a full scholarship to San Francisco Ballet School. And I was like, well, free sounds great, right? So we went to San Francisco Ballet School and I moved there when I was 14 and I got hired when I was 16 and by the company. And I just was good at it. Really. That's what it kind of comes down to. And I scored with the right body type ish. I was a fat ballerina for a few years there, but um that's like the oxymoron of the century, right? You're like, there are no fat ballerinas. I was 5 pounds overweight, but I was going through puberty and it was hard times in a ballet company. But then the transition for singing was nuts because I get this job, this audition, not audition, everyone had to audition for a role in a ballet called West Side Story Suite. It's the shorter, condensed version, and it's the ballet version. And there's one woman who has to sing. And I'm in a ballet company. I had never opened my mouth to sing Happy Birthday, let alone in front of like I think Bernstein Trust or something. I forget who was in the room when they did it, but they filmed it and I ended up getting the lead role. And I was 19 and I ended up doing the opening night, which was a huge deal because there were all these older, way more famous dancers ahead of me that should have done it. But I did opening night, and the choreographer for the Broadway show that I ended up doing 8 years later was in the theater that night. And when they were casting the Broadway show, like 8 years later, they were like, we need ballerinas who can sing. And mind you, we're in a silent art form. Like we take pride in being silent, like landing from a jump and not hearing us is like, that's like pride and joy. So singing, there's not a lot of us who make noise. So we're there's like 4 of us, I think, 4 ballerinas who can kind of sing. And I started on Broadway because of that show, like 8 years prior to the Broadway show. Isn't that crazy? I know.
Yeah.
When you think of things that are written in the stars, because even like growing up in Lake Tahoe, there's no reason why I wanted to dance. Like no one in my family does ballet, especially. And like, how did I know that's what I wanted to do? I have no idea. It's just sort of like
So
when you go with the flow, I guess. It's pretty cool.
how did how did San Francisco Ballet Company, how did that even come up? Was it like, was there an audition? Was there a, and also because you're at high school age at that point. Like, are your parents like? 'Cause I know plenty of parents that would be like, no, just go to school and get a job and whatever. But
Yeah.
so like, how does that even
Yeah. No,
like?
it's so
How
many
do you
things.
even breach the subject of like, hey, you know what? I don't
Ah,
want to go to regular school. I want to just do ballet at this super competitive school. And also, by the way, they're gonna pay for it.
yeah, exactly. So they have auditions for the summer intensive, and that leads into the year-round program. So it's like two auditions essentially. So you're auditioning for like the summer camp, and if you get into that, it's I think there's 24 girls in the summer camp, and then there's only 12 girls in each class for the year-round program. And so within the 24 kids, like they kind of use that as like a 5 or 6 week audition. And so I got a full scholarship for the summer camp, full merit scholarship. I was like so excited. Um, the audition, by the way, we had a teacher in Lake Tahoe who was like, "You are a big fish in a little pond, and if you don't get out, you're gonna just like be stuck here forever. And you're 14, so you're still like young enough to go somewhere, but if you wait any longer, they're not going to accept you because you're just going to get harder and harder to train. Essentially, like the older you get, the more like stuck in your ways you get. So and like you've just outgrown Lake Tahoe. And so my parents were like, okay, well, we'll audition for 3 summer camps. They were the top schools in the country. And we drove down to San Francisco every time. And I'll never forget like eating an In-N-Out burger. My hair is like all like, I don't know, just messy. And these two girls get out of the car in front of us. I was a little nervous, but I didn't know what to expect. So I wasn't that nervous. These two girls had like slicked buns, like their hair, like their faces were just like this.
Yeah, yeah.
And they were wearing like matching, like everything was just like, oh shit, those are ballerinas. They like walked perfectly turned out. And I remember walking into this audition being like, oh my God, I'm like, I can't believe that I'm about to do this, just make a fool of myself. Um, but surprisingly, um, I always got in. Like it was amazing. These girls, I ended up going to ballet school with them, and then I got hired and they didn't into the company, which was like kind of insane to even think about because I was from this small town, no training. I was just like a hot mess going in, but I was trainable and I had the right body type and like yeah, I don't even know. But with school, I was homeschooled and um, that was like the best thing to do in Lake Tahoe because the schools, they're fine. But my personality when I was growing up was a lot less outgoing. And I loved art so much. Oh my God, I loved it so much. And I really loved math too. But I got math really quickly and then I'd want to go color. And they were like, no, we have to do this and ushered me around. And I never had, my mom said I never came home with a completed piece of artwork. And it just felt wrong to her. She was just like, why can't you just let her just like do this? She gets gravity, she gets the number. Like she was fine in all these things, but she wants to just draw and do it at her own time and pace and blah, blah, blah. And she ended up meeting this family that had an amazing group of kids that she was like, what are you guys doing? And they were homeschooled. And she just decided that's what we're going to do. And I'm grateful because I don't think I would have been able to be as creative. Also, I don't think I would have had enough time to become as good at the things that I was good at, like ballet and music. And, we did a bunch of sports, very athletic family. But we were really, my brother and sister were really, really talented as well. And we just had more time than most kids to do
Yeah.
that. Because when you don't have to learn at a pace, with a big group of people, you can kind of like in certain subjects we were like blowing right through them and then other ones we take more time on, but it kind of is always a lot shorter than the public school like amount of time that you
Yeah.
need.
No, that makes total sense. Yeah, I have, well. I've shared slight thoughts on that schooling anyways, as a different conversation for a
Yeah,
different day.
it's you know what, it's not like it's better or worse. Everyone has my
Yeah.
husband loved going to school, and it's I'm happy for him because that's awesome. But I also loved being homeschooled and
Yeah.
having, time.
What I was gonna say for the audition pro like so you said the three top schools in the country, and what I was about to do was make a, like an athletic analogy, which is like when you're getting recruited for college for whatever the sport is, you have to have some kind of idea of like what's actually like what your level actually is.
Where
Um
you
yeah. So like did you have somebody tell you like, "Oh yeah, these like you're at this level," or were you just kind of like, "Screw it, we'll just see what happens."
Yeah, well, it's hard to tell because I was so young. Oh, okay, this is not a compliment to anyone but in Tahoe, unfortunately, but it was a compliment to me. I was like 7 with the like 18-year-olds. Like I was just a really advanced kid as far as
Mm.
like dancing goes. And like literally always with the old kid, like the older, high schoolers and stuff. And so I was young always. So when I hit like the 14 year old age range, everyone was like, now you're becoming like closer in age and you're really good, but you're not going to keep getting better like the way that you have been. So, yeah, you need to leave. And it was like, well, we don't know what to do. Like, where would you go? And I was thinking I wasn't good enough for the big companies. And this one teacher who had been in a big company, she pulled my mom aside and she said, you need to get her to these 3 auditions. Don't even waste your time with the small ones. Like just go big. And if you don't get in, then that's fine. There's next year, but just try for the biggest companies. And it was really cool because I got into all 3 of the biggest schools in the country. And it was like I got to pick. The easiest choice was that I got a full scholarship,
Yeah,
you know,
yeah, I can imagine. It's like, oh, it's
obviously.
free. Okay, sounds good. Oh, that's
Yeah.
awesome. So,
Yeah.
the
It's
other
cool.
thing that I wanted to ask, I'm jumping around all over the place, but
That's okay. Go.
when you went on opening night when you were singing a
Uh-huh.
couple years later, is it like other industries where people who have, we'll say, like paid their dues or whatever, and was there like a level of animosity towards you that you were picked, and did you have to deal with that, or or is it more just like, well, that's what like for athletics, so it's like, okay, well, that's what coach said, so I
Okay,
guess we have to
that
deal
is
with that.
such a great question, Eric, because yes and no. There have been a few big, big breaks in my career, and they were always given to me because of someone who was supporting me that should have maybe been doing the role, but they were like, no, Shannon's just better at this than I am, and she deserves to do this role. And I only got the part for opening night because of the 2 women who were higher in rank, older, and way more famous than I was. They literally went into the artistic staff office and they were like, "We know contractually, like we are supposed to be doing this role, but Shannon is so good at this. We both support your decision to like give her the role." And I didn't know any of that was going on because I was young and I mean, no one would let you in on any of that stuff until way, way, way later. Like I want to say 15 years later, I heard the story about like how it all kind of really went down. And I even had like Rita Moreno was calling the guy who like teaches you the ballet. He's like a part of the Jerome Robbins Trust, threatening like if she does it, I'm not going to support the show. Like, because I wasn't Latin enough. Like I am Latin, but I don't speak Spanish and I didn't grow up in like Cuba or like, like Puerto Rico or wherever. Because we had like some real Spaniard kind of people or Latin-esque
Hmm.
dancers who were above me. And so they like everyone was not rooting for me except for the 2 dancers. And they literally stepped in and they're like, no, we want her to do this. Like we know it's a big deal for her. We have plenty of role. Like we're good. And that's happened to me for pretty much every big break that I've ever had was because of someone who shouldn't be supporting me, who was supporting me and like just I don't know. It's like that's a really cool thing to say out loud because everyone always thinks, there's like glass in your point shoes and somebody's stabbing you in the back to try and get roles. And that does happen a lot. But I have a feeling that's more because that's kind of like the way that our director had control over the company was to like make sure that we were like separated in a way where that we like he would put two people who were like best friends up for the same role and then not decide coincidentally like who's going to do opening night. And so then you kind of become competitive on one another. And he liked that because it kind of makes everybody try harder, which can get better dancing out of people, but it doesn't create a really great environment to work in. So I I don't know, mixed feelings about that one, but in my experience, I was always really supportive of people, especially when they deserve it and they've worked really hard for it. And that was my experience pretty much my whole career, which is amazing.
When did Broadway show up for you? Was this something like once you got to San Francisco, was like the goal Broadway?
After that show for West Side Story Suite, everyone was like, "We're gonna lose her to Broadway," and like it's not like Broadway knocks on your door necessarily. It's not like they did, and they had me audition for like actually the West Side Story show, but they were looking for actual like Latin artists at the point, and I was like, I don't speak Spanish. That's not my first language, like so I obviously didn't make that cut,
Hmm.
but 'cause it was not authentic enough, which I totally appreciate. And so I auditioned for a couple shows that year because they did knock. I will say they did knock. There was a few casting directors who came to see the show and they're like blown away. They're like, you should go to Broadway. And I was like, great. I mean, but I'm not going to leave the ballet to go to Broadway because I know that the Broadway shows can close within like out like a week, right? Whereas the ballet is not a revolving door, and I wasn't ready to give up my ballet career. And so I think it was literally 8 years after that show that I was asked to do the Broadway show. And that was so crazy because the choreographer slash director of that show I had worked with for 11 years during my career with San Francisco Ballet. So he knew me, I knew him. He asked me at a coffee shop if I was interested, and I told him no. Because I was like, oh no, I'm fine in my career here. And he was just like, damn, like I could just see he goes, just audition, and I was like, oh, okay, fine. But I can't believe that I even rolled my eyes. It was the best show, the best opportunity, the most incredible experience. Um, and it's funny because I got the job as the last one cast. They had already cast the show, and the music director, I was not part of the show. I had auditioned, and then I told them that I wanted to do the lead or nothing, and they were like, "You're not the lead, so nothing."
Nothing.
And here I am. I am still waiting to hear back. They don't like call you on Broadway to like tell you that you didn't get a role. They only just spend time like emailing and calling people that do get jobs. So here I am. I was like not in the show at all. And I had this like massage therapist that I used to call Master Yoda because he would say things every once in a while. I was like, mic drop. And he said, what would you do if you got the role on Broadway? And I said, I'm going to buy a Chanel purse. I don't know why I was just like, that's what I always wanted. And I was like, if I get a job on Broadway and specifically this job, I'm going to buy a Chanel purse. And he goes, you should buy the purse as if you already have the job on Broadway. This, mind you, this is like so long after they had cast the show on Broadway. There was no chance that I was going to be in the show. And so I was like, all right. So I went out. I ended up having to order this Chanel purse online, comes in the mail, and I get a phone call from the director, Chris Wheeldon, that the same day I got the purse asking me to be in the show because I guess the music director had a fit because there weren't enough ballerinas who could really sing in the show, in the ensemble. And he was like, we don't have a show. This is George Gershwin music. Like, we can't just like fake the music, right? I know you want dancers, but like we need one more at least singer. And the casting director was like, okay, well, there's this one girl, but you're gonna have to beg her to be in this show. And like we're all gonna have to like really try hard to get her because she doesn't want to do it unless she's the lead, and she's not gonna just leave San Francisco Ballet. So they ended up all begging me the day that I got this Chanel purse in the mail. And I ended up being the last person they cast in the show. And I ended up getting to do the lead role eventually, which is pretty special. And yeah, isn't that crazy?
That's bonkers. That's so bonkers. What's wild to me is like you hear stories of people being like, "Oh, it's always Broadway is the goal or this or that." And it sounds to me like you're just kind of going day by day and like you're like, "Okay, I happen to be good at this thing because I like doing it." And then somebody comes calling and it happens to be Broadway. And it's
It
like,
sounds like that, but there's like so many yeah, I've been so blessed. I will say I'm very, very blessed, and I have a lot of things that just sort of like just happen and whatever.
yeah.
But there's a lot of
I didn't mean that in a negative way. I guess what I meant from
oh
the
yeah,
standpoint of like
very
there's so
blessed.
many people that are super ambitious to get like maybe it's a status symbol or whatever. It's like think of like oh it's a Harvard degree or whatever like you whatever the case is. Um for like has it hit you yet that you did all those things? Like
No. And I love that you just said that because yesterday I was talking to someone and they said that this study came out about aging, and it takes 10 years for you to adjust to an age, which means you're never like in the moment like wow, I'm an adult, you like look in the mirror and you're like holy shit, who's that, and you're just like in this moment. And I'm having this identity sort of crisis of being a mom, and she's like yeah, in 10 years you're going to realize like you're your mom, and it's just like who you are. Right now you are not there, you're still like recovering from like being a ballerina and an actress, a Broadway actress. And so I was like, yeah, it's so interesting. So no, there's moments that hit you like when you listen to your symphony for the first time in an orchestra and you're like, I've always wanted this. This is amazing. And I had that moment in the ballet because when I was 14, I saw this magazine with a girl who is in San Francisco Ballet, and she was hired when she was 16, and she was in this certain pose, and it was in this one place in a studio. It was this beautiful studio, and I remember just being like, "Oh my God, I'm like 2 years away from that, but that's my goal. Like I want to do that someday." And okay, I get hired when I'm 16, which is amazing. And that woman retired that year, and she was teaching the ballet class. I was on the spot that it like it all hit me at the same time that I was living this dream, this picture that was in my mind in this magazine of this woman. She's teaching me, and I was in the position. I remember looking in the mirror and be like, oh, I'm in the same spot in the room. Like that's the angle that they took the photo from, and I am the person in this moment. Like there's a few moments where it like hits you and you're like, wow, I'm doing what I wanted to do. Um and when I was doing the lead role on Broadway, there's like one breath that I remember everything around me. It was like this one moment in the show that like I can still tell you like the color of the floor and the people in the audience, the front row. I just remember everyone around me. I remember everybody's eyes, like it's pretty cool. So there's moments where it hits you where you're like, yeah, this is where I'm supposed to be, you know?
did it the like the performance aspect of like bigger and bigger shows or where you're just kind of doing your thing? Like the nerves, like going out opening night versus okay, this is the second night versus now it's my first night on Broadway versus my first night on
I
whatever. Like even
um
like if you're doing singer-songwriter stuff, like is that different when you're performing live
yes,
versus ballet?
so
Like
different. So different. My ballet, the first few years, I'm a real cool cucumber when it comes to theater. I just have always had like these nerves of steel. There were a few shows that were just like insane in the ballet where they didn't rehearse me, and like they'd be like, we need you to go on in, and you have a 15-minute ballet that you have to learn in 5 minutes and, like not kill anybody. And you're in front of like 3,000 people and it's like terrifying, or 7,000 was one of them. And it was like, are you fucking kidding me? It's so hard. Like, oh, and to just like get through that, after that, everything was gravy. Like, so for the most part, Broadway was, we were so rehearsed for that stuff that by the time you got on stage, you were like chilling. It was great. They
Yeah.
really prepare you, at least for our show they did, and it was really lovely because it was like you had months to be like, I got this. Whereas in ballet, it was a little bit, you would think, because we have so long to rehearse for things, but it's like someone gets injured or sick, really, it can happen mid-show. And you're like, you're on. And you're like, oh my God, my big break is like, I'm terrified. And I, after a few of those shows, I was like, nothing could scare me anymore. I was like, yeah, I'm good. And with my shows, I mean, if I mess up, it's my music. It's not like I have to apologize to a composer. I'm like, oops, let's start over. you know, and you have a sense of humor, and the audience kind of comes along with you anyway. So it's definitely a lot less pressure. I don't put pressure on myself in live performances when I'm on stage. I do all of the pressure before that. So if I'm rehearsed and ready, I am never nervous. The only nerves that really like hit you are when you're not prepared for something.
Yeah.
It's like falling forward.
Yeah, no, that makes total sense. So where did whenever, by the way, whenever you need to stop, just let me know. And we
Okay,
can we
cool.
can wrap up for
I
sure.
think so. Yeah.
Okay.
Maybe you'll come
Um so
we'll hear her.
was the singer-songwriter stuff just like you had some free time and you were interested in it and you started it, or like where did
Um,
that come
Question.
like along the career path?
I was always a closeted singer-songwriter. Well, not always. I was always a composer. Um, and and then in the ballet, it's funny. They really, especially as a woman, they do not appreciate if you are not 150%, in the ballet. So like if you're doing anything else, people are like, oh, she's not serious about this career. And so it's like, even like reading a book, like I'll never forget there's a girl literally just reading a book. This is how archaic like not San Francisco Ballet, but all ballet companies are. It's just like girl reading a book, and because she wasn't in the scene that they were rehearsing. And I remember my director like freaking out over her reading a book and like, you're not paying attention and da da da. And it was just like, oh my God. So if she's not sewing point shoes while this other scene's going on, she doesn't love ballet. And she ended up getting fired that year. And we were all just like, what the fuck? So if you're like studying something else, you just kind of keep it to yourself, in the ballet, especially as a woman. You just I don't know why it's that way, but it's just an archaic art form. But as a singer-songwriter, I was just like, they didn't appreciate that I was good at something else because they thought like I wasn't gonna be 100% at the ballet. So I just sort of kept it to myself. And after I started singing, I was like, I want to continue exploring this, but I did it completely closeted. And then when I went to Broadway, it was so interesting. I went from the silent world of ballet where you're not really supposed to do anything else to these side hustler, loud people that like literally have jobs, but they have their life and they have a career on the side. Like, so the Broadway world was very, very cool and very different than the ballet, and loud.
Freeing a little bit for
But
you? Freeing a little bit for you?
like meeting, it was like meeting your people. You're like, oh my God, I never fit in with this other group of people. And I always felt like the black sheep. And then I meet all these black sheep and I was like, this is amazing. So cool. So we had a really, I mean, I had a great time, but there was this period where we were opening the show in Paris. We did an American in Paris in Paris. It was the best marketing ever. And I didn't have a piano. And I was used to having a piano around, and I was like feeling as if like my soul was dying. It was really weird because I didn't realize how much I relied on the piano to kind of be like I could vent, but it also recharged me, you know? So it was like a really cool symbiotic relationship that I had with this piano, and I didn't have one. So I ended up going to this party in Paris, and there was this beautiful house, and they had this gorgeous piano, and I was just like eyeballing it the whole night. But I was really shy and nervous, and I was also with like opera singers and like Broadway singers and people who were like paid to be singers, and I was like technically not the singer. I was the ballerina who could sing, so it's like I'm not the singer who can dance. And I was like, I don't want to sing in front of these singers, but I also think I'm gonna die if I don't. And so I like at the end of the night, I had like a couple of drinks and I was like, can I play the piano? And I like closed my eyes and I hated the guy who was hosting the party. He like did the ding ding ding, Shannon's gonna play a song for us. And I was like,
Oh,
no.
that's the worst. No, you just gotta start.
And I
Yeah.
remember just sitting there like audition. It just felt like such an audition for, and we were all just meeting each other. So I was like, oh God, this is gonna be terrible. But I opened my eyes and they were all crying. It was like a really cool experience. It was the first time I had shared my music with people, and they were like what? Who wrote the song? Like that was amazing. We didn't know you could sing. We could, it's just a really cool thing. And they opened up this side of me that was like, okay, I didn't die through that, and I actually feel better. And everyone was saying that I did a good job, so I'm just going to keep doing it. And I mean, I opened my mouth, and now I can't shut up. Here I am.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Oh, that
Uh,
sounds amazing. Well, you have time for one more?
sure, of
One more
course.
question. In
Yeah.
terms of the navigation from like all the behind the scenes things and personalities and this person doesn't like that person, but if you know that person, you might get this role and blah 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 like and then if you're doing your own stuff like okay you know that person but now the internet's there and so maybe I can do it without that and also side note it's funny you mentioned people being invested in other things while at the ballet company so Peter the guy I mentioned earlier he was
Wow.
producing all his music in between rehearsals at the opera so he was in the back with his like laptop and all sorts so he was doing completely the opposite of what the ballet company would like um
Funny. It's true though. There's guy. That's a guy for you.
yeah yeah.
Like it's a choreograph on the side, and yeah, we can't read about.
Um, but in terms of just navigating like all the behind the scenes stuff, the personalities, the people, the connections, the networking, the like did you was there any I don't want to use the word difficulty because that's not exactly what I mean, but like in terms of for you in your own career, like you hear stories of like oh the music industry's gatekeeping this or that. Um Like, how was that experience for you? I guess just as a whole. Like, I don't like.
Yeah.
I think you know what I'm asking, but I don't know exactly
Totally.
how to word it.
To answer it in a couple like different angles, just because there's many careers that I've been, dabbling in my career, in my life. Um, okay, first one is in the ballet, you can't really fake anything. So like it doesn't matter who you know. It's like if you aren't a good at dance, if you're not good enough, you're not getting the role. It's just cut and dry, really.
Hmm.
And there's always someone in the wings waiting to take your job. Doesn't matter how high you thought you were, you have one bad show and everyone remembers it forever and you will get fired. Like it's really kind of messed up, but it's just the way the ballet world is. It's cutthroat. Broadway, I want to say this in all respect, but you are less of like an expert in all of the things. You kind of are like good at everything. So you're not like the best dancer, the best singer, the best actress, all like in one. Those are usually like the lead role, right? But in general, like you have to be able to do a lot of things on Broadway and not necessarily be like just a ballerina, right? Or just a whatever singer. So and mind you, there's so many ways that I could be wrong in that realm. But from my experience, I was like, okay, it is a little bit more in who you know, but mostly it's your reputation. So like if you have a bad reputation, it gets around and nobody wants to work with someone that's like not fun to work with. So unless you're really freaking talented, and that talent can overshadow all of the things that you've done that annoy other people, your reputation is everything. So that that was really cool to see because a lot of times like in the ballet people would stomp their foot and like cry and they'd get their way and I'd be like that's not what is going it's like that's not right.
It's
What's
like
happening?
this also is not a
Yeah.
good long-term plan for success.
Yeah, no, totally. I literally took an acting class in ballet when I was dancing to learn how to cry on cue because all the girls that learned that were like crying in their meetings with the director would get their way. And I was like, that can't be real, but I want to try. And I couldn't for the life of me. So I took an acting class, and Eric, I swear, it was so funny. I cried in this meeting that wasn't going my way. And he was just like, no, you are not doing this part. And I was like, and he was like, oh, no, 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 you misunderstood. I mean, you get to do the role. And like he switched it around, and I'm like pretending to cry, going like, what the fuck? Like, that's crazy. So it works. In the ballet, it's kind of, I'm sharing way too much, but like, it's kind of classic in that way. Broadway, all about your reputation. Music industry, oh my God, there's so many sharks, there's so many like murky waters that you have to swim through, but the cream always rises to the top in every career that I've ever been in. If you're good and you like your product, your end product is like quality, like oriented, you're going to be fine, and it's your reputation. It's like all the things that I've learned from you have to be nice, you have to be talented, you have to be smart, you have to like you can't just sit on your butt and wait for somebody to give you the role. You have to like reach out. Like I emailed the woman that I wanted to work with for my music, and it took like a year before anything happened with it, but it still happened. And I do a lot of that stuff where I'm like, I would love to work with this person, and I just have to find the right angle to get in line to do that. And then, but it usually happens. It may not happen overnight, but nothing of quality does, in my experience. And you have to like put in your 10,000 hours, which I do. And I think if you work hard, it's one thing. If you work smart and hard, that's where the real magic happens.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great place. That's definitely a great place to wrap up. Because otherwise I'd ask a gazillion more questions, and you have
Well, I'm so
a
grateful.
baby. So, um, any last nickels before we get you out of here?
Well, I'm just really grateful that I got to have some quality time with you. This is lovely.
Yeah, it
And
was a great
thanks for
conversation.
listening to me. I know it's a lot of me, but thank you. I appreciate
Yeah,
talking.
absolutely. If the people are interested in kind of checking your music out or any of your other work out, where should they go?
Yeah, well, it's basically you can stream all of my music on any of your favorite platforms, and it's Empress. Empress is my stage name. Empress-music.com. You can find everything. And if you want to follow me on social media, it's always empress.music. So you can find it's the at symbol, obviously, but then you'll find me.
Sounds good. As always, guys, links in the description. Shannon, amazing conversation. Um, and thank you guys for listening. We'll see you guys next time. Peace.